presentation and recording is in progress. Good afternoon, everyone. And let me start sharing. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is, yes, hold on, continue to share. Excellent. All right. As Buggy shared, my name is Luis Javier Pentón Herrera. I always tell my students to choose one of the four names. They usually go with Luis, it's shorter, easier. And today we're going to be talking about all English learning is social emotional learning. I have to disclose that this title comes from a book that is called All Learning is Social Emotional Learning. But I thought let's add English into it, okay? Not related to the presentation. It's a book from ASCD. It's all other authors, other work. But I thought I'm going to use that title as kind of an idea for a presentation, and I thought it was a good idea. So today we'll be talking about social emotional learning, frameworks, and practical applications. And before we get started, I would love to hear very, very briefly if you can write in the chat. And I see many of us here. Thank you for joining again. I see from Rio. Oh, Gisa, benvinda, benvinda. So please tell me a little bit about you, your context. Are you teaching in early childhood, primary education? So I'm seeing here in the chat, secondary, higher tutoring, because I know some teachers do in independent or um, kind of entrepreneurship teaching. So, and that's perfectly fine and wonderful as well. So please do let me know. Other, I've learned also sometimes in the audience, I have teachers who are teaching in kind of professional development in businesses or business settings. So I would love to hear very young learners. Fantastic. Hold on, because I forgot my glasses. Higher education, primary, and primary. Oh, nice, nice, very nice. Higher education director of studies. I would like to introduce my teachers to SEL. Oh, Christian, wonderful. Yes, we need more administrators and directors in the SEL wagon. So thank you for joining. Secondary education teacher, Luciana. Oh, fantastic. Brazil. Wonderful, wonderful. Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we have a little bit of a mix here. So social emotional learning is for everyone, okay? As we will see today. It's also for teachers, but that's a different conversation, okay? So today, our conversation today, what is social emotional learning? I have divided it into four parts. Introducing what is language? Introducing social emotional learning, SEL and language learning, and then social emotional learning and language teaching. That's where I'm going to share some examples, some activities. But the first three, we're going to explore a little bit more about language, what is language, and social emotional learning, building up to SEL. All right, so what is language? And let's begin with a short story, which is really more of a poem. The short story is that I introduce poetry in my classes as often and as regularly as I can in all my classes. I love poetry. And this was from one of my students, and I think she was A2 or B1 level around that. Um, and this was in the US when I was teaching and working in the US. I'm living in Poland. And she said, in my language, I am funny, I am quick, I am myself. In English, I am quieter, slower, less me. And I thought this was a great, great example of a poem and just a simple poem, really only 8 lines, that speaks volume about the what language really is, the power of language itself. Sometimes we think of language only as reading and writing, but we fail to realize at times, or we forget to think about language as something that becomes part of who we are, part of our identity, part of how we see ourselves. So this is important for us to think about as language teachers, because when we're teaching language, we're not only teaching conjugation, words, we're teaching more than that. We're teaching students how to participate, how to communicate, how to be themselves, a new layer of themselves in a different community, in a different society. Me, when I'm speaking Spanish, for example, Luis, who speaks Spanish, is very different from Luis, very, very different from Luis, who speaks Polish or who speaks English, in different contexts, because I'm interacting with different communities, right? So this is very interesting. I don't know if you know this TV show. It's called Modern Family, and there is this fantastic. Oh, that was another idea that I could have started with, but here it is for you. If you're presenting, you're welcome to use this. Gloria, she's one of the characters, and she speaks English, but she has a little bit of a hard time. She's from Colombia as a character, and she has this fantastic statement in one of the episodes. She says, because everybody's always making fun of her English, and she says, "Do you know how smart I am in Spanish?" And it's the same idea, languages really give us the opportunity to show who we are or not, right? In there, more than anything, and this is the message that I want you to take away, language is always connected to our identity, whether we realize it or not. Okay? So, with that in mind, I would love to hear from you, and you can write your answers. You're welcome to share your thoughts. What is language? What is language? What do you think language is? Communication. Dolinda, thank you. Language is communication. Let me give us some times here. Channel of communication. Yes, yes. Language, communication. See, language teachers, we know that language, self-expression, interaction. Thoughts. Yes, yes. Raisa, thank you so much. Yes. All right. Please do continue. Self-expression, interaction. So I did not see language is conjugation or anything like that here. Grammar. Okay, okay. So when we think of language, this is my perspective on language. Many, many times we tend to focus on the blue circle, which is academic. There are academic elements to language, of course, and that's what we focus on. We're going to go a little bit deeper into that in the following slides, but language is, of course, academic, but it's also social and it's also emotional. The older I'm getting, the more that I listen to, I don't know, 80s and 90s songs in Spanish, and then I'm like, oh, I remember that. It hits differently in Spanish than in other languages, right? Nostalgia, all of these things. Language is emotional. It creates emotions, it shares emotions. Um, it's language itself is an emotional act. I see it as that. But it's also social because we communicate, we express, we interact, as some of you mentioned there. And of course, it's academic because we follow academic principles that we learn in school. I'm going to share with you here some paraphrasing that I did from some sources, okay? When we think of language as social, language is a communal cultural resource and practice. Some scholars think of language as that. Okay. Some scholars think that language is closely tied to who we are and how we feel. Language shapes how we communicate and how we interact with those around us. Look at the words that you wrote in the chat. Many of them are coming through here. Language can be understood, and this is more academic, language can be understood as a structured system of grammar, vocabulary, and sounds that can be analyzed, taught, learned, and assessed in formal educational settings. And this is more academic, this is more perhaps what we're used to as language teachers, right? Nothing wrong with either of them. But language is more than just one dimension, it's multidimensional. All right? And sorry, my dog is in the background. I don't know if you can hear him, but he's kind of barking, sleeping, barking out loud. So, all right, so let's continue. Now, I want you to go back, and this is just kind of like a little bit of exploration for you as a teacher, as a language teacher. Now, revisit your answer to my question of what is language, and notice in which of these circles does your answer better fit. Do you see language more as an emotional practice, as a social practice, or as an academic practice? And this is going to tell you a lot about perhaps how you approach. Oh, thank you. Academic and social, social and emotional. It's going to tell you a lot about how you approach language education, language teaching, and of course, how your pedagogy shapes the way that you approach instruction itself, right? So as teachers, we always have to, and this is really a very interesting process as educators that we have to find the right balance because we want to make sure that we're including, yes, academic, but also social and also emotional. Oh, okay, okay, good. In the heart of all three. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, so we have that's the balance that we want to hit, okay? All three. We want to make sure that our students also know that language, yes, grammar is important, vocabulary is important, assessments are important, but also there are social and emotional aspects connected to it that we're going to explore today, of course. All right. When we think of language teacher education, I'm preaching to the choir here because you probably know this, but in language education, language teacher education, we're often taught to treat language primarily as an academic activity, right? I almost told you the answers that I have written down here. So I'm just going to ask you, why do you think this is? Why, as teachers in language education, why do you think we primarily approach the conversation of language as something academic and we don't talk too much about social or emotional dimensions of language education, language teaching, language learning? Why do you think that is? No wrong answers. So you're welcome to. And you're also welcome to share your thoughts in the in via a microphone, okay? Ah, rules. Thank you. Goal oriented. Okay, okay. Assessment. Okay. Good, good. Okay, good. I think all of you saw the PowerPoint before we got started. All right, good job. Great, great job. All right. So I have some ideas here that I'm sharing with you. It's easier to teach and assess what is measurable. And we learn about this in language objectives. Language objectives, content objectives have to be measurable. We always hear this again and again and again, right? That's academic. Nothing wrong with academic. I'm not against academic. I'm just saying we have to focus in all three, right? So teacher training emphasizes methods, structures, and outcomes, which of course leans more into the academic side. But then the social emotional dimensions, which is the human, I call it the human dimensions of language education or language teaching and learning, um, they're expected to occur naturally. Somehow there is this idea that when students get frustrated, they're going to naturally understand, hey, I'm frustrated because I don't know how to say that word, and I'm going to regulate my emotion, and magically I'm going to be able to say it. There is this idea in language teacher education that, the belief that emotions are going to be naturally regulated, that the social aspect could be communicating with others, collaborative learning. It's going to happen just naturally. And we know as language teachers that's not the case. Okay, last quiz here for us. Where do you, and this is a question for you, what do you think is the result of ignoring the social emotional aspects or dimensions of language learning? So if we focus solely on academic, what do you think it's going to happen? Or what do you think happens? Or what have you experienced as a language teacher that has happened? Because we tend to focus only on assessment and this and that, and we forget about the social and emotional aspects. Ah, Luciana, emotion is not invited in the classroom. That's interesting. Very traditional teaching, yes. Isolated, Chantel, thank you for that. Yes, yes. See, it's very hard to tell students, leave your emotions outside of the classroom and come in without emotions. That's not gonna happen. I mean, we're teachers and we come in with emotions too. Cold, distant environments, yes. See, engaging students, yes. Dead language. Oh, right. So, okay, good, good. Oh, that's a really nice idea. Dead language. Okay, good, good. You're limiting different communication. Yes, also yes. The focus on teaching is mainly unfortunate. On cognition, Giselle. Thank you, Giselle. Yes. All right. So I have some ideas here. So this comes primarily from my own research. So of course, it's a little bit biased. So, but this is what I have learned. So I'm sharing this with you. Okay. So when we tend to focus more on academic and we forget about or we just don't acknowledge the social and emotional dimensions of language teaching and language learning because teachers were also affected by this. Teachers report feeling unprepared for the emotional demands of teaching. I don't know if you remember, perhaps as your second year of teaching. I remember my first year of teaching, and I've said this story many times. I would arrive back home. I would go back home, and I would just drop everything on the floor and just go to the sofa and just cry. I'm like, I cannot keep doing this. It was hard. It was intense, right? And I was not prepared for that. I didn't know that teaching demanded so much emotions from me, and there were a lot of emotional demands for teachers. Lack of preparation can lead to stress, anxiety, burnout, especially in early career stages. Teachers struggle to manage their own emotions, which affects classroom interaction. So, yes, this is affecting us teachers because we're not prepared to deal with the social and emotional demands that language teaching and language learning needs from us. But then also because we're experiencing these emotions that we don't know, and these demands are being placed on us and we don't know how to deal with that, then that in turn affects our students and their learning, right? We can only give what we have. So students may experience confusion, anxiety, disengagement. Many of you share this, sometimes leading them to drop out. Okay, so not focusing on social emotional aspects of language teaching and learning affects students, affects teachers, and affects the entire system. All right, so let's go into social emotional learning on that positive note on what we're ignoring. Let's talk into let's go and now a little bit of what we can do about this, okay? All right, so how do we overcome stuttering? I like this particular story of mine. I often share it, but when I think of social emotional learning, I often frame social emotional learning as my perhaps, and I like to think about this, my own experience with learning languages. And I arrived in the US when I was 17. I was born and raised in Cuba. And I arrived in the US when I was 17. And I still do, suffer from stuttering my entire life. And it was very, very difficult for me, especially when I was a teenager, because stuttering, I don't know if any of you had ever had a student who stutters. Is very, very difficult to overcome it, especially when you're anxious. It's like you cannot hit the stop button. It's just continuously going and you don't know what to do. So you get frustrated and you're anxious and it's a lot. So you only see stuttering like the iceberg, but there is so much more beyond that, right? Below the surface, you feel fear, shame, guilt, anxiety, hopelessness, isolation, denial, all of these things. And as a teenager, I didn't know how to deal with that. So it took me a long time to understand what was happening to me because sometimes they take you to speech therapists, but many of them have never experienced stuttering in their lives and they're telling you from the book, oh, you need to do this, you're not doing it correctly. No, it's not working for me, right? So this is something that we have to also understand. But long story short, I had this teacher of mine and he told me a strategy and I started using it quite often, especially for speaking. And then nothing, it's not rocket science. He just told me, hold something in your hand and imagine whenever you're speaking in public, just everything that you think it's clouding your mind, that is making you anxious, just transfer it here, you know. And it worked for me. It worked for me. So when I'm teaching now speech, I like to teach speech, speaking to my students. Those are the classes that I enjoy the most now when I'm teaching. I teach here in Poland, English and Spanish, so I'm 50-50 in both programs. And I talk to them about strategies on how to overcome anxiety, how to overcome some of them. I had a couple of students who had stuttering issues also. Um, and we talk about the fact that communicating, speaking is more than just opening your mouth and no, you have to go through the whole process. It's an emotional act for many of my students because many of them are anxious, self-conscious. Many of them are dealing with low self-esteem. And of course, we know as language teachers that all of these elements affect, these are emotional aspects that affect communication, that affect performance. And at times, and I came to this realization as a teacher because many of my students in the past they have had bad experiences or bad grades, grades. So depending on the country, you might call it something else. But at the end of the semester, they receive notes or grades for the class, and they have received lower marks. That's another one, lower marks because they couldn't overcome their anxiety. They couldn't perform. And as a teacher, I kept wondering, am I evaluating their actual capabilities in their language or their ability to manage their emotions? And I realized that I was actually evaluating their ability to manage their own emotions. They couldn't regulate their anxiety, and I was evaluating that. I wasn't evaluating their actual academic skills because they couldn't perform. They wouldn't get good grades, right? And other teachers were doing the same. So I started talking to them more about strategies on how to regulate emotions, and it made all the difference. The reality is that emotions are everywhere in our classroom. We cannot tell students or teachers to leave their humanity and their human experiences outside the door. And this is a screenshot that I did from I don't know how I came to it, but it was a video in Instagram. And I thought it was fantastic. It says, "Teacher truth, every seed holds a story." And one child, mom is an alcoholic, the other one has an undocumented family, lives with grandparents, parents are in jail. All students are coming into the classroom with their own baggage, and we cannot tell them, leave it outside the door, don't bring this in. As teachers, this is what we have to work with, right? So social emotional learning is about acknowledging that students are human beings. They're not just individuals who sit down and they have to take notes and you expect them to learn. That's not how it works. So social emotional learning is about holistic education. We're looking at students as human beings, as individuals who are socially, emotionally, and academically engaged at the same time. That's what social emotional learning is. Uh, do you agree or disagree with this quote? It's an old book, but I think it's still quite relevant. Today's neuroscientists are breaking new ground in helping us understand why emotion is an important learning variable and how the affective side of learning is the critical interplay between how we feel, act, and think. Mind and emotions are not separate. Emotions, thinking, and learning are all linked. What we feel is what's real, even if only to us and no one else. Emotions organize and create our reality. What do you think about that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? I I do, me too. I don't know if that was on a different conversation that I asked you, but I think quite well. Okay, good, good. Okay, good. Yeah, so emotions, mind and emotions. I've had experiences with my students, especially when I was teaching in the US, and we had every year we call it the WIDA tests. If you want to learn more about this, WIDA exams, which is to get their levels, and it would determine whether or not they're moving forward in the program or they would stay in the same level. And many of my students that were so anxious all the time that they would actually get physically sick. So instead of them worrying about performing well in the exam, they will be just physically ill. So that was not of course, they didn't perform their best. Emotionless communication has no impact, Liza. Thank you so much. Yes. See, when we think of social emotional learning, going back into the social, emotional, and academic aspect, social emotional learning at the end of the day is about understanding that as language teachers and language learners, education should be about emotional development, social aspects, which is identity formation, and academic growth. All three elements must be combined in our education if we want to really help successfully students to be successful in life in the classroom, but also outside when they go into the workforce when they are adults. So there are many definitions of social emotional learning. This is one of my favorite ones. One of my favorite articles from Osher et al. And it says that SEL, social emotional learning, is commonly described as the process by which children and adults, it's for everyone, okay, acquire and apply competencies to recognize and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, appreciate the perspectives of others, establish and maintain supportive relationships, make responsible decisions, and handle personal and interpersonal situations constructively. Long definition, but in essence, social emotional learning, it's about helping students understand that communication is a social process where emotions are present, and we have to be able to understand how we communicate, how our communication comes across, and what strategies we can implement to, as language teachers, that is helpful and beneficial for us and others. Okay, so you can think about social emotional learning in that way. There are many approaches to social emotional learning. You may have heard some of these before: mindfulness, restorative practices, translanguaging, humanizing pedagogy, positive psychology, character education, holistic education. There's so many, so many. All of these approaches are within this umbrella of social emotional learning. If you want to also learn more, check out the Harvard ESOL lab. You can just Google it. Because the Cassell framework, or Castle, some people call it Cassell framework, is the most popular when it comes to social emotional learning, the most well known. But there's so many more frameworks, so many more practices to social emotional learning, which at the end of the day, the purpose of all of them are the same, which is to prepare socially and emotionally intelligent individuals, because in education, in language education specifically, we focus more on cognitive, which is academic intelligence. Nothing wrong with that, but what about social and emotional intelligence? Okay. Now, when I think of social emotional learning, because many people think that it's only for children, yes and no. It is for young people, but when we're including social emotional learning for young people, and I have examples and activities that I'll share with you, but for young people, primary school, SEL focuses primarily on the development of foundational habits such as emotional regulation, empathy, cooperation. For young people, when I was teaching primary school, I wanted to focus more, and this is what I really focused on the most, is how students' actions have consequences for others. And then we will talk a lot about this. Okay, so we had the action and consequence tree, which it was kind of like a graphic organizer. And then when students did something, I would ask them, okay, so write here what you did, and then how your actions have consequences for you, one circle, and for others, for your peers. And then they would think about that. So they would have to think about how their actions have consequences. And then also, we would say, for example, especially for young children, primary school, sometimes they don't realize that they're very, very loud. And so we have to also talk about regulation. Yes, it's good to be excited, but how can we be excited in a way that is not affecting others? Because sometimes when I was teaching second grade, I survived 1 year teaching second grade. Nothing against second grade, they're lovely, but they had a lot of energy. And sometimes I would just jump, yeah, because we did activities and they were always good. But I'm like, yes, yes, it's good to be excited, but how can we be excited inside ourselves, right? So not so much outside. But so this is for young people. It's definitely helpful for them to understand how to manage that, right? So understanding how they feel, managing those emotions. For teens and adults, social emotional learning usually focuses more on interpersonal communication, which is fantastic for language teaching, interpersonal communication skills, identity formation, and relationship building skills. An example of this: when I arrived in the US, in Cuba, we don't have, I don't know if you've heard of the personal space. Have you heard of this concept, personal space? Well, I had not heard of that. In Cuba, we don't have personal space. We're Cubans. We talk close to each other. We kiss on the cheeks. We hug, all of that. Then I got to the US, and my teachers never told me this is a social aspect of education, of language teaching specifically. So my language teachers never told me about personal space. So one day I was talking to one of my friends, and then I went to hug her, and then she's like, "Oh, what happened?" She's American, and she's like, "No, no, Luis, here in the U.S. we have personal space. It's important." I was like, what is that? What is personal space? And then she had to explain to me what personal space was. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know. So that's the social aspect of communication, interpersonal communication skills, right? So again, language, communication, culture, that's the social aspect of language teaching and learning. Okay. We also need to talk about that with our students. For teachers, SEL is also for us because it supports emotional intelligence, our emotional intelligence and well-being, and also helps us strengthen our relationship with students. At the end of the day, see, many times, especially when I was a novice teacher, a lot of things that, especially when I was working with teenagers, I didn't understand that many times what students do has nothing to do with me as a teacher. It's something that they're going through. What they're bringing into the classroom is what they're dealing with. And I sometimes that would affect me because I would tell myself, "Oh, I'm not a good teacher. I'm not doing a good job," or my students they're not paying attention because of this or that. It had nothing to do with me. Right now, I know being more emotional intelligent, understanding better, and instead of scolding or telling students, "Please pay attention," I realized, you know what? It's better if I just ask students to work in their groups or and then just go to the side with that student and ask the student, what's going on? How can I help you? Why are you acting this way today? So it's a little bit different, the approach, right? So social emotional learning is also for us because it helps us, it guides our pedagogy, it helps us understand that our students are going as they're human beings, they're going through things. Just talk to them instead of scolding them, yelling at them. I'm working with different teachers all over. And in some countries, there are still practices where students are, and this happened also in Cuba. In Cuba, also they use corporal punishment. Corporal punishment, like the rules, they hurt a lot. There were wooden rules that were very painful. That's still something that happens in many countries. Or I've also learned in some teachers instead of corporal punishment, but they don't do that perhaps, or they do more like yelling and no, don't speak or this or that. That also doesn't work for students, especially this generation of learners. What they like, what they prefer, what it's really helpful to create a supportive learning environment is connecting with them, talking to them. They're human beings. So that also helps us as teachers to understand, yes, social emotional learning is something that I can use for my own pedagogy, for me to learn how to approach students even in difficult situations. Let me share with you now that I was talking about the teachers that I'm working with. So I'm working with students and teachers, and I'm working with different programs all over. And recently, I was talking to teachers because this is a coaching program that I'm finishing with some teachers, and three of them shared something with me that I want to share with you. So this one, she's a veteran tutor teacher, and then she said, so I was teaching this student and she's finishing medical school, so she's learning English for specific purposes. And then I was tutoring this student of mine, she said, who is in her last year of medical school, and I corrected her on the verb conjugation, and she just erupted. And she said, I'm so stupid. You told me this for the last 2 months. You've been telling me this, and I'm still making this mistake. And then she started crying. And then the veteran teacher that I'm working with, she's like, Luis, I didn't know what to do. I have an adult woman crying in my classroom and she's just erupted. What do I do? Okay, hold that thought. The second one said, my student just lost their motivation. I don't know what to do to help them. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong. I must be a bad teacher. Many of us might feel this at some point in our careers. Number three, I have a student who never participates, even though I know they understand. So when you hear stories like this, and I think some of us might have similar experiences where we have students who are disengaged, sometimes when we blame ourselves because something didn't work, or when we have situations where emotions or social situations or emotional outbursts just happen in the classroom, as teachers, the reality is that we're dealing with this every day. So many people tell me, well, Luis, social emotional learning sounds like things for psychologists, but I'm not a psychologist. Well, actually, Social emotional learning is not for psychologists, it's for teachers. We deal with human beings every day. So social emotional learning, and this is something that I just wanted to share with everyone, social emotional learning is not about psychology. Social emotional learning, it's about understanding us, teachers, that we're human beings, that we're dealing with human beings, and that social and emotional situations will happen in the classroom. So we just have to know how to deal with it, right? So for students, how many students have all of you had, for example, that feel anxious, frustrated, demotivated? Those are realities of our jobs. We have to know how to deal with that. We have to be able to talk to our students. We have to be able to shift the energy in the classroom. I had classrooms sometimes that I walk in. I'll share with you a difficult situation that I had last semester. I was teaching Spanish. And in our department, I'm always telling my students, because I do approach all learning as social emotional learning. So I told my students from day one, okay, so in the Spanish speaking world, depending on who you're talking to, we have 24, 25 countries that speak Spanish as a native language. Some people say 21, but we have more than 20. So start listening to different accents. Start researching different cultures. The one that appeals to you the most, lean into that. Start using that accent, that vocabulary. Start building your identity around that, because that's who you're going to become. Start becoming part of the Spanish speaking community, leaning into what you feel more comfortable with. So my students started doing that. 4, 5, 6 weeks, I could see already some students using some sounds, some words. I'm like, oh, yes, it's working. Well, one day they came back from, because we had, usually my students have back-to-back classes during the day. They're packed, their schedules are packed. And we had a class in the morning, and then they went to other classes, and they were going to come back in the afternoon. And then when they came back, and it's like, hi, Luisa. Okay. I was like, what happened? The energy was so low and down. And I was like, are you guys okay? Are you tired? What's going on? And then they told me that they had a situation with another Spanish teacher, that the Spanish teacher was telling them, in this class, you only speak Spanish from Spain. Don't start speaking other Spanishes and this and that. I was like, how is that possible? And it just completely demotivated my students. So at that moment, because they were A1 level, I had to really, as a teacher, I said, okay, I have to go through this content, but this requires more pressing attention. So I had to start talking to them about shift the energy that they had, because they were quite demotivated. As teachers, we know that this happens to us every day. We have students sometimes walk into the classroom, and we want to feed them academic information, but we have to meet them where they are. So I had to take care of their motivation first. And of course, then eventually I talked to the department and they took care of that. But as a teacher, I had to first treat the situation at hand, which was their demotivation, because for them that was a big blow, because they were building their identity and it was shattered in just a moment, right? So I had to go back into that and say, no, 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 this is what we're going to do. And then we started talking about different things, and they changed their attitude, their energy. They became more excited. Also, so many times when my students are frustrated, Polish students, when I'm teaching English, Polish students, it's very hard for them to do the TH sound. Thought, think, through is very hard. And because they don't have that sound, they have many other sounds in Polish. Incredible the amount of sounds that they have in Polish, but they don't have TH. And sometimes they get frustrated. And frustration can be quite interesting. And then I put and these are things that I use, by the way, as a teacher, and I've learned this through social emotional learning. Humor, it works for me. They laugh at me or with me, but we laugh at the end of the day, right? And then so I have tongue twisters in Polish, and I'm like, okay, you're trying th, I'm gonna try that one. And then they laugh at me, and it's like, you see, that one is more difficult than, so come on, keep going, keep going. And this helps them. So this is what we do as teachers. This is what we have to do as teachers to help our students, right? So at the end of the day, social emotional learning, it's not about being a psychologist. It's about understanding that there's social and emotional aspects of language teaching and learning that we cannot ignore. If not, we're preparing fantastic machines. We're not preparing learners. All right? All right, check in. Any questions or comments so far? Are we awake? I think I may have put some of you to sleep. I hope not. All right, good. Excellent. Let's keep going then. So let's go into part three. And Part three, we're going to be talking about social emotional learning and language learning. And I'll give you some examples later, okay? I don't know if some of us have heard about the affective filter. And Raisa, thank you. SEL skills help to teach productively, communicate effectively, and resist negative social situations and live without stress. Yes, that's what we hope. Yes, yes, thank you. So if you haven't heard about the affective filter, it's huge in the US and teacher preparation programs. That's all we talk about. Oh, we have to lower students' affective filter. That's fantastic. And the way to do that to make a better classroom environment, the affective filter is this idea that when negative or undesired emotions go up in our students, anxiety, stress, frustration, then the higher the affective filter, the lower the cognitive skills the students have. Because the more stressed you are, it's harder for you to process information. So we have to lower the affective filter so students' cognitive skills go up or cognitive capabilities go up, right? And we keep hearing this again, oh, we need to lower students' affective filter. But how? How do we do that? And that's how we do it through social emotional learning. So when we think of the affective filter, and by the way, this is me trying to be an artist. So imagine that this is a wall and the wall is being built by different bricks, and these are the bricks. Okay, so this is me being an artist. All right, so low self-esteem, anxiety, isolation, stress, fear of failure, lack of motivation, lack of support. Uh, you can add so many more here. So you have a teacher on one side, language instruction, that's us. And then you have language learning, which is the student's brain here on the other side. But then if you have all of this affective filter, all of these barriers, all of these factors that are increasing or building the affective filter, then you're building a wall between our instruction and students' brain processing learning, right? However, through social emotional learning, here we go. This is how we break down the wall. We lower affective filter. And then this is again my artistry, trying to be an artist here. So teaching goes into students' brain. But how do we do that through social emotional learning? And social emotional learning, emotional regulation strategies, mindfulness, peer collaboration and teamwork, empathy, talking to students. Talking to students is very important. Encouraging students. Come on, you can do it. Well done. Um, when we're especially A1, A2 students, because A1, A2 students, and let me pause here for a moment for motivation, talk about motivation. A1, A2 students, more than anything, they're running on motivation when they're learning language. That's what they're running on, motivation. They don't have an identity yet as a language speaker of that language because they're learning that language. So they don't have an identity built. They cannot hold on to identity. They're entering that community. So they may know someone, but they're still not participating in the community in that language. So they cannot hold on to community yet. They have nothing. So they're only going through language learning with motivation as their fuel. So motivation for A1, A2 is essential for students to continue. The largest number of students that we lose to language learning happens at the A1, A2 level. Once they overcome the issue of motivation, once they get to the B levels, it's easier for students to continue language learning. Why? Because they already have an identity built around them as a language user. They may use language, of course, not at C1, C2 level, but they're using it now. They're able to interact with the community so they can hold on to those elements, right? A1, A2 motivation is essential for them. That's why it's very important. I love teaching A1, A2 students because I know the importance of motivation for students. Okay, so talking to them, encouraging them, positive reinforcement at the A1, A2 level, as teachers, they're going to make a lot of mistakes. Focus on one at a time. Don't battle the entire mistake board, just one at a time. If they're making pronunciation mistakes, okay, focus on one. Focus one at a time, one at a time. It's important to keep them moving forward. I see this when it comes to motivation. We really have to balance because I know academic requirements for us and our students that have to take tests and do this and that. I know that that's a balance that we have to somehow find. Uh, but always focusing on one element at a time, I find that is helpful for my students instead of telling them all the mistakes that they're making at the same time. that could be quite demotivating. Okay, so let's go into SEL and how it looks like. And these are some examples. I'm looking at the time because I do want to give us time for a Q&A. I want to chat with all of you. So let's just share some examples here. I might just skip through some of these. I have many more, but Buggy has and the team, they have the PDF, so they'll send it to you, okay? But I work with many teachers. One of them, she's from Canada, and this is how she incorporates social emotional learning. This is for primary school students, so we do have some primary school students here. And she does what she calls explorers in nature. We first make a list of the things we hope to find in our walk. So she goes to the forest in Canada, and then they make a list. It could be bugs, colorful leaves, bird's nest, etc. They each have a small notebook to record their observations, and then we head out for a walk as explorers and scientists. Tools like binoculars and magnifying glasses make this even more fun. Sometimes we write out our discoveries, and other times we draw them, letting art focus our attention on the details. And sometimes she says also, because her students, many of them are refugees, and they have experiences with trauma, that sometimes if you have taught students who have experienced trauma, sometimes trauma, especially for young children, it becomes evident in their bodies and in their energy surges that they get up and down. And sometimes she says that when she has young children who have had past with trauma or experiences with trauma, and she just lets them run in the forest, and she's like, okay, let's run over here and then back, and then they do forced runs, she says. So this is an example of how to use social emotional learning, which is place-based education, by the way. AI, this is actually an activity, and this comes from this book here, but this is AI, artificial intelligence, which is everywhere. This is something that I actually use with my students at the university level because I teach a lot of speech, conversation, we do a lot of debates, and we talk about different ethical issues connected to AI and to many, many more topics. But talking about specifically about topics that are important or relevant to my students. And when it comes to debates, we always talk about how to respectfully agree and disagree with others. And the fact that you do not have to, first, debating is about sharing your opinion. We're focusing on the problem, not on the person. We never attack the person when we're debating or when we're sharing our thoughts, right? So it's about respectfully disagreeing with someone or respectfully agreeing with someone. So we talk about all of these topics, debates, strategies. I give them sentence starters or phrases that they can use to respectfully agree or disagree. And I think this is also very important nowadays because many times, I would say primarily, most of what students see online, in Instagram, in X, all of these social media outlets, what they see is just disrespectful debates and a lot of confrontations. And as language teachers, me personally, I feel that it is a responsibility when I'm teaching speaking to help my students understand that speaking is not about imposing our opinions, but about respectfully having a dialogue with someone. You can respectfully agree to disagree, and that's fine. We all have our own perspectives, right? So this is intercultural communication, respectful dialogues. This is another example. Poetry. I love poetry. I started with poetry, so this is another example. This is for teenagers, high school. So I taught high school in the US for 9 years. I think as teachers, we always find our population that's our population to teach. For me, is teenagers, high school. That's why I love teaching now first year students here at my university. They're 19, they're teenagers still, young adults. And for teenagers specifically, a lot of them, this is A1 level. We did activities connected to the feelings, as you can see here, feelings board, emotions, and they had a lot of emotions. They brought a lot of emotions with them into the classroom because many of them were coming from different countries with different experiences that were extremely difficult to process, even as an adult. And then we shared those with me, and I was trying to figure out how to help them first name what they were feeling, but then also write about it to be able to be mindful in that moment and just say, okay, this is what I'm feeling. These are the words that I can connect with this emotion. And they started writing poetry, creative writing. And I introduced different types of poems, haiku, sinkain, different types of poems. And they could do creative writing, open, open prose, like a kind of they didn't have to follow anything specifically, but I gave them different options. And you can see here some of the things that how they felt, some of the emotions, love, boring, friendship, loneliness, hate, to miss someone, pride, curious, shyness, down there, fear with the doggy, fear. So, that was an opportunity for them within many activities like this where they would use language, but also it would give them the opportunity to just sit down for a moment and just process what they were feeling. And I thought this was very powerful for them. This is an example here for the poems that I used to teach them, haiku, sinkain. I recommend that. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but this was fantastic for my teenager students. Again, this was secondary school. Yeah. Also here, this is more for primary. I could also see this for secondary as well. Primary, secondary. Um, we talked a lot about when it comes to what to do, taking actions, and this is also social emotional learning, understanding where you live, your society, and what can you do about it, right? What problems do, because it's social, it's the social aspect as well. So we talk a lot about social aspects in our society. And this is an example, another activity here from the book, but in here we were looking at the problem, habitat loss, pollution, hunting, and how it's affecting pandas. And then they had to talk a little bit about what they can do to save pandas, for example, right? So this is another example of social emotional learning, which is connected to place-based education. Social emotional learning is the umbrella also for place-based education. So in your place, in your society, what are some problems that you can find, and how can you find solutions for that? What can you do to help with the problem, right? So that's the social aspect as well, using language to solve problems. Oops, sorry, let me go back. This is a part of the activity for the panda as well here. Oh, sorry, I went back to the panda. Yes, I skipped that one. And this is the last one here, building networks. And this one I used it for my university students as well. And I always tell them, because many of my students, they want to be, these are my university students here in Poland for the English program. Most of them are influencers, they tell me. They're influencers and they want to become content creators and marketing people and like all of these business, IT, technology things that I don't have the vocabulary for, but they're teaching me. And I say, okay. And this is an example that we have in the book, Hannah and I, but this is an actual activity that I do with them, which is about building networks. And this is a social aspect of language as well. And I talk to my students about the importance, especially in the business environment, in the business world, in the workforce. You have to be able to use language to build your network. If you want to be successful, the importance of communication in building your network, in building your kind of a web of support in the professional environment, right? So we do a lot of role play. We do scenarios. If you're in a conference, for example, and you want to connect, here's scenario one, and you want to connect with a keynote speaker, how do you do that? What do you say? We talk about the elevator pitch. We talk about phrases that they can use. Again, this is using language to be successful in the real world. And that's the social aspect of language as well. So not only about conjugation, but how to use language for their future. And I'm gonna finish with this one here. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, just a couple of lines here. If students do not feel safe, they cannot learn. Creating a safe classroom environment is even more important when students come from refugee backgrounds. And this is one of the other students, all the teachers that I work with. Oops, sorry, from Canada, Rochelle, and she has also in Canada secondary schools, but she works with refugee students, and she talks about how social emotional learning is important for her and her pedagogy because she has learned that students, if we don't create a classroom environment that is helpful, that is students feel a sense of belonging, of safety in the classroom, then learning cannot happen. So that has helped her as a teacher to use social emotional learning to improve her pedagogy as well. And I'm going to stop here because I would love to hear from you. And I've been speaking for an hour, so I hope it was not too long. But thank you so much. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your questions. You will have that PowerPoint. Buggy and the team will share with all of you. And sorry, let me go back. And you're welcome to email me at any time. I'm going to leave it here if you need to. Thank you so much, everyone. Buggy, I think I put half of everyone here to sleep. So
I
everyone, I haven't
don't
seen many
think
people,
so,
but
Luis. Thank you a lot. It was very informative. A very great presentation. Yes, you see, not at all. Yes, and then we can wait a couple of minutes to see if there are any questions or comments in in the chat box. I really enjoyed it. And and I do agree. I mostly resonated with the part when you said that you never know why a student acts a given way, right? So there
yes.
are those students who just screaming at you, swearing, and then most teachers just switch and they just become, very angry.
Yes.
But that's probably not the right solution to that.
And I think as teachers also we have to realize that students are going through so much right now. They're everything that we are seeing as adults that is happening around the world, they're seeing because they have access to everything now. It's not like when I was growing up, we didn't have social media. We didn't have I'm not a dinosaur, but I'm still quite young. But we didn't have that back then, right? But now it's everywhere. It's everyone with a lot. And again, it's not that we have to be psychologists. We just have to be human beings. We have to remember that language teaching and learning
Yes.
is a
If I'm
social and
scared by
emotional
the news,
activity.
they are scared
Yes,
scared as well.
yes.
Exactly. And we need to keep that in mind and consider that. Yes. So I believe that I can see that you got lots of very nice comments here, but I cannot see any questions. Um, yeah,
Thank
so
you
some
for
books
your comments here.
about SEL. Mm,
Yes, teachers are also humans. Yes, that's another conversation, teacher well-being, which is very important. We have to take care of ourselves as well.
yes, we do have some sessions about that as well. So I think that we can finish here. Thank you a lot, Luis, again. You brought great ideas. I think um, you sparked some thoughts, I hope, in many people here today. Thank you. In a few weeks or days, you will be able to find this webinar along with the others on our YouTube channel. And please stay tuned and check what other sessions are coming up in the next month. So thank you again. Brilliant talk. Yes, as Anna said. And it was lovely having everyone here this afternoon. And I hope to see many of these faces again. Thank you.
Thank you all once again for the invitation. Thank you for your comments, for coming, and please do connect with me at any time. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Luis.
You.